It began with a call for help. On the afternoon of February 4, 1997, in Newton, Massachusetts, a 19-year-old British au pair named Louise Woodward dialed 911. Her voice was tense, almost trembling, as she told the operator that 8-month-old Matthew Eapen, the baby she was hired to care for, wasn't breathing properly. When paramedics arrived, Matt was limp, unresponsive. They rushed him to Boston Children's Hospital. Doctors worked frantically, intubating, checking vitals, running scans, but what they found went far beyond breathing trouble. Matt's head scans showed a massive skull fracture, his brain was swelling, there were subdural hematomas, pools of blood collecting between the brain and its outermost covering, and in both eyes, doctors saw extensive retinal hemorrhaging. 0.3 injuries. 0.3 signs. Together, they made up what medical professionals at the time considered unmistakable evidence of shaken baby syndrome. The last days of Matthew Eapen. Matthew had been in Louise's care for several months. The Eapen family, Sunil, an anesthesiologist, and Deborah, an ophthalmologist, had hired Louise through a cultural exchange program. She was young, far from her hometown in Elton, England, and according to friends, eager for the experience. But now, with Matt lying unconscious, the doctors were asking themselves a different question. Had this babysitter harmed the child she was meant to protect? Over the next 5 days, Matt remained in a coma. Machines kept him alive. His parents sat in shock, surrounded by the rhythmic beeping of monitors. On February 9, 1997, they made the impossible decision to remove life support. Matthew Eapen was dead. The arrest. By then, the police investigation was well underway. Detectives questioned Louise for hours. Her statements shifted in tone, sometimes defensive, sometimes calm. She admitted to, lightly, shaking Matt when he became unresponsive, and to, a little rough, handling in the days prior. To investigators, her words sounded like a confession. To her defense, they were the fumbling explanations of a 19-year-old under pressure, speaking in a second language. On February 5, just 1 day after her emergency call, Louise was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The story exploded across American and British headlines. In the UK, she was painted as a naive young woman caught in a nightmare. In the US, some saw her as the face of a chilling betrayal, the caregiver who became the killer. The prosecution's case. The prosecution built its case on 3 pillars: the injuries, the timeline. The science. Medical experts testified that the severity of Matt's injuries could only be caused by violent shaking, possibly combined with impact, and that such trauma would cause immediate symptoms. That if he had been alert and playing earlier in the day, the injury must have happened during Louise's watch. They emphasized the retinal hemorrhages and brain swelling as hallmark signs. They showed the jury CT scans, autopsy photos, and diagrams explaining how an infant's brain reacts to force, and they argued motive, not long-simmering hatred, but stress, frustration, and fatigue. A young woman in a foreign country, isolated, responsible for a baby, and one moment of anger that turned deadly. The defense. Louise's lawyers fought back hard. They argued that Matthew's injuries might not have been caused in one single violent moment. Some fractures, they claimed, appeared to be older, already in the process of healing, meaning the baby may have suffered earlier trauma, possibly weeks before. They challenged the certainty of shaken baby syndrome. Not every doctor agreed that retinal hemorrhages and subdural hematomas always meant shaking. The defense pointed out the absence of grip bruises on Matt's chest and arms, injuries they claimed would be expected if he'd been shaken with such force, and they painted Louise as inexperienced, immature, but not a killer. The trial's tension. The trial began in October 1997 and lasted more than 2 months. Courtroom sketches and video clips appeared nightly on television. British journalists filled the press benches, reporting each development to a captivated audience back home. Louise sat at the defense table, often in simple blouses and cardigans, her hair neatly tied back. She rarely showed emotion. The prosecution said she was cold, the defense said she was terrified. Witness after witness took the stand. Doctors clashed over the interpretation of medical evidence. One said the injuries were the result of a violent episode minutes before collapse. Another suggested they could have been the cumulative result of less obvious trauma. The jury listened, the public speculated, and in the background, the ghost of Matthew Eapen loomed over every word. the verdict on October 30, 1997, after 26 hours of deliberation. The jury returned its verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Gasps filled the courtroom. Louise stared straight ahead. Pale and rigid, the judge sentenced her to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years in Britain. Outrage erupted. Many saw her as the victim of an unfair trial and questionable science, but the case wasn't over. The judge's unusual move in an extraordinary decision. Judge Hiller Zobel exercised his authority to alter the verdict. 10 days after sentencing, he reduced the conviction to involuntary manslaughter, citing doubts about intent and the possibility that Louise's actions, while negligent, were not murderous. He sentenced her to time served, 279 days, and just like that, Louise Woodward walked free. The move shocked the public in the US, some called it a miscarriage of justice in the UK, it was hailed as the righting of a wrong. The legacy of the Louise Woodward case left a deep mark on legal and medical history. It fueled a broader debate about shaken baby syndrome and how reliably it can be diagnosed. Years later, one of the prosecution's own medical witnesses, Dr. Patrick Barnes, admitted that evolving science might cast reasonable doubt on the certainty of the original conclusion. The case also became a touchstone in discussions about cultural bias in courtrooms, the pressures on foreign domestic workers, and the devastating consequences when trust between a family and caregiver shatters. As for Louise, she returned to England, avoiding the public eye for years. She later trained as a dance instructor and eventually started her own family. But her name remains forever linked to those 7 days in February 1997. Even now, decades later, the questions linger. Was Matthew Eapen the victim of a split-second outburst from a stressed teenager, or of an accident compounded by flawed science? We may never know, but for those who followed the trial, the image of a baby's final days, and the young woman who stood accused, still haunts the space where truth and doubt collide.